Hello, everybody, and welcome to our final webinar in the Evolution of Work Summit. We've had an amazing 2,500 people join us for our previous webinars this week. So I'm really, really excited to end the week on a really high note with a webinar all about culture with three absolutely fantastic panelists that I will let introduce themselves very shortly. So often culture is quite a fluffy topic. And at Flexa, we've helped a lot of companies to showcase and define exactly what their culture is to talent in order to get discovered by people that will thrive in that environment. Because what one person's ideal culture is very, very different to another's. But if you haven't been to one of our webinars before, I'm Molly. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Flexa. And Flexa is a platform that enables you to get your company discovered for what makes it unique. Whether that's flexible working, whether that's culture, whether that's diversity, amazing career progression, or even just free lunch or a dog-friendly office, people are coming to Flexa and searching by exactly what will make them thrive. We're used by 3 million people all over the world. And actually, in celebration of our Evolution of Work week, we have launched a really exciting kind of benchmarking quiz to help you to understand exactly what your EVP compares to in terms of the market. So if you would like to go to Flexa, so flexa.careers, and then click in for employers, you'll be taken to that quiz. So you can pop in all of the bits about your culture. You can see how many other companies have a similar culture to you. You can see how many other companies have a similar working environment, and also how competitive that is versus the market. So we're really, really excited to launch that. So please do check that out. But without further ado, I would love to introduce our fantastic panelists. So Oliver, would you like to introduce yourself and your role?
Of course. So hi everyone, I'm Ollie, or Oliver, and I work for TUI. I am the Global Social Media and Recruitment Marketing Manager, which is a very long title. But essentially I look after all of the social media channels, the strategy, and bringing to life our employer brand, our employer value proposition throughout all of our marketing channels to try and, bring the culture of TUI to life through all of our external facing channels.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And Kiran, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. I'm Kiran. I am the head of talent acquisition for Heineken UK, relatively new within the business. So I've been there approximately 3 months now. In terms of what I do here, aside from the recruiting aspects and managing a fantastic team, part and parcel of me joining Heineken is to effectively look at our attraction campaigns, working very closely with our employee brand manager. But from the wider aspect is also to look at incorporating talent management to everything we do. So again, when we talk about culture, is about our succession planning. How is that going to look down the line? How we're going to implement new ways of working, but also in doing the right things as well. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you very much, Kiran. And Chris, could you introduce yourself too?
Well, of course. I have to caveat before I start that I have pneumonia. So real dedication to being here. So if I'm gasping for breath, it's because I can't breathe properly, which is apparently quite a prerequisite to life. But my name is Chris Woods. So I equally have a long job title. So I'm recruitment marketing or regional recruitment marketing at EI&D attraction lead at Mars. Gave myself the job title though, so it's only me to blame for how long it is. And in essence, what that means is I'm there to help Mars attract talent which would otherwise potentially not know who Mars is, and in particular, how do we bring more diverse talent to Mars as well?
Brilliant, thank you so much. And I think culture has become kind of increasingly talked about or looked into by candidates. A recent study showed that 77% of potential candidates look at what a company's culture is before they consider joining a company. So it's becoming increasingly important. But as I mentioned in the very beginning of the introduction, I think a lot of people see culture as quite fluffy. Like it's something that can't really be defined. Maybe it's something that isn't actually that important and people just like to talk about and companies like to talk about to make themselves sound good. And I think all of us here today would disagree with that. But I would love to start with a definition, because I think it's always helpful for us to fully understand exactly what we are talking about in terms of culture and then how we can utilize that to attract aligned talent. So Chris, could I come to you first?
I have a really simple one. It's something a quote I heard years and years ago, which I love. And I think culture to me is how your employees feel. but particularly how they feel on a Sunday evening. So we talk a lot about the Sunday Scaries. And for me, having, you can never get rid of that. There's always going to be some level of Sunday Scaries because we have deadlines and work we don't always want to do. But I think it's overall, and it's how people feel about working for your business. So if the majority of the time they're happy, they're engaged, they feel psychologically safe, I think that's your culture. It's your culture. It's what your people are saying about you. Brilliant.
Thank you very much. And Kiran, how would you define culture?
Yeah, I think by definition, culture is about, culture is shaped by beliefs, values, and behaviors, right? So it's pretty much an unspoken rule for a lot of people, whether it be in your personal life or whether it be in an organization. But I mean, truly at its core, culture is defined by the atmosphere of a place. It influences whether people feel comfortable being themselves, how they collaborate, and how motivated they are to contribute. So again, when we talk about culture in an organization, it's pretty much dependent on the geographical situation as well. Culture could be defined, let's say in North Yorkshire, slightly different to London. But ultimately, if the values and behaviors of an organization stems in the right direction and for the right reason, culture is then defined in those locations by its pods, by its leaders, by its people on the shop floor.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And Oliver, how would you define culture?
I don't think I can top what's been said already, because for me, it is that collection of values, beliefs, behaviours that sort of define how a colleague, collection, business and organisation operate. That's what I think a culture is in a company.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's very clear that it's more than just vibes. It is very much built up of values, behaviors, how people feel, how people act. And often, sometimes, a lot of people will say, culture is defined by some of the worst behaviors as well as some of the best. So businesses need to be very, very conscious of both the positive and negative aspects of their cultures. I'd love to kick off by kind of understanding a little bit more about your company's cultural identities and how you've chosen to define them, because I think as people have appreciated and learned much more about company culture, we've kind of lent into the fact that there are a serious variety of cultures. If you look at a startup, you've often got the unstructured, slightly chaotic, but rapid career progression, huge exposure, quite fun, quite informal cultures, all the way through to, I think, what people would maybe associate more with corporates. And I'm sure Kiran and Chris, you will, and Ollie, you will dispute this, but very often I think people expect corporate cultures to be much more structured, a bit more traditional, a bit more hierarchical. And generally, I think people used to think the company culture was just based on size of an organization and maybe maturity, whereas actually it's much more than that. So I'd love to hear about, Ollie, how TUI's culture is defined.
So our culture, obviously, it's built up over multiple years, and we're a global company, and we actually recently launched, 2 years ago, launched and developed our very first global EVP, an employer branding strategy. And as part of the development of that, we did a lot of research looking into culture, values, vision, but not only that, the real life lived experiences and values of our colleagues across our global business. And what this revealed is that our culture is defined by the fact that we roll up our sleeves, we get things done all together whilst having fun. And that sounds really vibey, like you've just said, but this is what actually came out of a survey that we defined through our actual colleagues, the real life experiences of our colleagues. And all of this behavior that we've defined is done with the intention of delivering unforgettable moments for our customers. And that's what coined the Let's TUI It definition. You can see it above my head here. That's what coined that, is that culture there that we defined. Let's TUI It is built from the real life lived experiences of our colleagues when we defined our EVP and our EB.
That's really interesting. And Chris, what process did you go through to kind of discover and define Mars's culture, and what is it defined as?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting question, because I think for anyone that knows Mars knows we're a relatively complex business. So if you look at our business, we're huge. So we're 150,000 people across the globe. We're made up of a lot of different brands that are inherently different. So, if you look across our snacking division, we've got chocolate in there, gum, we've got pet food, we've got vet sciences and vet health. So hugely different. And so for us, really building that culture, and the other thing as well, we're still family owned. So we're still a privately owned business despite our size. And so for us, the culture, kind of taking a step back, has to be really rooted in what we do. And so for us, the culture is around three different things, and it's what we call the essence of Mars. And that's the core of what we do. So firstly, you've got our 5 principles. So they're genuinely at the core of our business. They're the values that drive us as an organization. So you've got quality, efficiency, mutuality, responsibility, and freedom. And those are values we make decisions based off, and they're universal across the business and universal across our different cultures as well. So in terms of, I'm talking like geographical cultures there. You've then got the associate concept, which is really around, at Mars, we're associates, not employees. So we have a different relationship with the business. It's a two-way relationship. So we give our best, and in return, we can expect the best back from Mars. And then the final one there is around people leadership. And I think this one for me is the most key, because our leaders are the guardians of our culture. And so having leadership, line managers there that can really drive that culture is so key. And all of that comes, I think we'll talk about this probably in more depth throughout, but all of that comes from listening. Yeah. And so that's really at the core of how we define that. It's around listening, and it's around being true to who we are, but adapting for where we go. So, the 5 principles are decades old, and they're still the same, but we adapt what they mean with current context. So it's still rooted in our history, but it's adapting to where we are in 2024 and beyond as well.
Really interesting. I think as how cultures develop over time, and as you say, the principles can stay the same, but how they feel will change and vary. Kiran, how has Heineken kind of defined their culture, and what was that journey of discovery?
Yeah, I can only speak very briefly on it, having only just joined the organization, but certainly from the conversations that I've had with our leaders and just my team alone, when we look at defining Heineken's sort of cultural identity, although we are this global organization with a fantastic consumer brand, we are in essence quite decentralized. So every single one of our operating company has the ability to effectively define its own culture based on our sort of unique, our own unique sort of presence. Let's say, for example, within the UK, Netherlands, etc. So a lot of the work that was done over the last couple of years was in shaping our sort of employer brand. To moving from Faces of Heineken to Your Future Untapped. And we sought to sort of uncover true colleague experience in the best way possible. So a lot of this was done sort of through research, spanning locations, functions, seniority, plus recruitment and D&I hotspot as well. Because when we think about FMCG, and I know Mars can obviously speak towards it as well, there's a decline of interest of the newer generation. When we think about millennials, Gen Z, and certainly Generation Alpha, who's set to join the workforce in 5 years' time. So for us, only by speaking to our colleagues, we were able to get true insight into what they feel is special about Heineken as an employer. So 3 defining themes were present throughout. We are values-led and future-focused. We have a close-knit teams and true community. And lastly, colleagues feel sort of trusted and empowered at work. So we developed those themes into 3 sort of core pillars, each aligned to our corporate values. And our corporate values are care for people and planet, passion for consumers and customers, courage to dream and pioneer, and certainly enjoyment of life. And when we think about our three pillars that are shaped directly by our people and defined our UK Heineken culture, it's the three the sort of three EVP pillars for your future on tap, which is we're raising the bar, we're rooted in community, and we're backed by trust. So as you can see, a lot of it is centered on our people as opposed to just Heineken as a brand and a business.
Yeah, I think that's a really useful kind of overview of how it can be woven through very different areas of business. I think it also, what the three of you said there, it got me thinking about the fact that very often culture is slightly aspirational. And I think it's very interesting when we look and when we understand culture, is there's a fine balance to tread between it being authentic and it being true, and people very much feeling that that is the culture and agreeing with the way that it's been verbalized. But also you always want to be striving for it to be better. So there has to be this element of aspiration when you're thinking about building a culture of wanting to be better without that seeming disingenuous. And I think that can be quite a tricky line to tread sometimes, particularly as businesses change and businesses evolve. And it's actually something that we at Flexa have gone through recently, was trying to really think about. We've kind of moved away from, you know, this very scrappy startup early phase and sort of moved more into like rapid scaling. And that had a real impact on our culture and the kind of people that were thriving. And so we went through a very interesting exercise of asking about it, understanding how people experienced the company. And we then came up with sort of almost resetting how we defined our culture, because it had moved and had evolved so fast. And we wanted to make sure that we were very clear in terms of articulating what the reality is, but also where we wanted to get to over the next year. In terms of like high performance, but still fun, still not too serious, still incredibly performance driven, and you know, rewarding hard work with a lot of autonomy and flexibility. But it is something that needs to be constantly understood and assessed. You know, is the balance of reality versus aspiration right? And are people genuinely experiencing the culture in the way that you believe as leadership? Because there can often be some disconnect there. As someone put in the comments, is like organizations often don't realize how much senior leadership do define culture. It's absolutely huge. And obviously there is a bottom-up definition as well, but you can't fight against the kind of top-down directive of culture. So I guess kind of moving on from that, when we've talked about culture, and obviously talking about the fact that it's both about current employees, but also being able to try and find talent that is going to be the right fit. When you're in interview processes, when you're talking about your culture and employer branding, how do you try to assess whether someone is going to be the right culture ad, I suppose? Chris, I'll start with you.
Yeah, and I really like to start the phrase you used there, the culture ad, because that bit's really important for me, because you know, I think we're kind of finally moving as a world away from talking about culture fit into culture ad, but that's the key. And I think for me, the balance, there's definitely a balance there. It's about how you're trying to keep your culture and really ensure that for us, literally the essence of Mars remains, and what we love about the business and what works so well about the business is there. And I think there are amazing ways of doing that. At the same time, we're also, you know, trying to find people who are going to come to the business and add, and you know, particularly in my role when I look at recruitment marketing and how we can market our culture out there, it's a really, really fine balance between just telling the story and, as you say, that aspirational piece. So there's different things that we try and do. It's about making sure that we again have culture. For me, comes down to diversity at the root. It's about having diverse voices and about making sure that there's different opinions at the table that can form what we're doing, especially as we grow the business. And that's why I'm so passionate about the ED&I part of my role as well. But I think a big way we can do that is looking at skills-based hiring with then some of those behaviours. But the behaviours can't be, the classic MBTI profile type. So we've got this one bucket of 16 that we love to hire from, because if you look at me, I've been at Mars 6 years. I am probably the opposite of what you would typically call someone that fits in. And the value I've added, because I bring the diversity of that. So yeah, it's going into the skills-based hiring, really understanding what we want to hire as a business, and then what those people need to bring to us and our non-negotiables in terms of behavior. So some of those for Mars, if we look at, you need to be collaborative. We're such a collaborative organization. So that's a real non-negotiable for us. But there are so many parts of that, I think, behavioral we need to move away from. You know, things like, I hate them, but the case studies in interviews, which are, you know, from 25 years ago, which are so aligned with one particular answer or one particular type. And then, you know, the part I can talk about far more freely and which is really comfortable for me is what we're doing to build that into our funnel as well. Because I think you can have a really diverse recruitment process, but if you don't have a diverse recruitment funnel that brings that culture into it, it's just that you're just driving towards that homogenous recruitment process again. Yeah. And so it's about just really understanding and making sure, you know, for us, we want to be representative of the markets we operate in, and that's key to our culture. So yeah, it's balance, but I think hiring for people rather than hiring for someone that really is that exact fit to what you think you need, because quite often it's wrong.
Very true. Kiran, what methods do you use at Heineken to make sure that there's that kind of cultural alignment, but also that culture out?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, Heineken is very deep rooted in its culture from a global perspective, but certainly from a UK perspective as well. You know, we're a very long-standing business, and we think about, as an example, in Tadcaster, where, you know, one of our sites is the John Smith Brewery that's been there since the 1700s. So, you know, from a culture perspective, we're very much rooted in history. I think in terms of how we look at sort of ensuring that I think, just going back to what Chris was talking about, making sure that we have the right behaviors, but also not falling into the trap of hiring the same people and continuing with the status quo. We actually did a bit of research earlier this year, and that was shared with the business. So we partnered with an insights, an agency and research platform. We conducted a study to look at Heineken's standing from a ranking perspective against not only our competitors, but within FMCG wide. So when I think about Heineken in the short space of time that I've been here, you know, we have a workforce of high tenure. So as we add new people to the organization, naturally, they are going to be inducted to our existing culture as it is. But how do we continue to evolve the organizations to ensure that we have an outward looking view of bringing culture that reflects societal changes, especially in the regional areas as well? And what this study did was gave us a view in terms of the ranking. I won't share too much about it just now because I'm not the expert on it. Our employer brand manager is the one that's running with it. But we started tapping into the different sites to say, hey, look, this is where we're ranking. This is what we should be doing better of. We know that within the brewing industry, in general, it's a very white male dominated area. So again, how do we look to expand and diversify our workforce? And part of that is to ensure when we conduct our interviews, we're not just focusing solely on Heineken behaviors, and then actually now starting to make a shift more towards skill-based hiring. So therefore, we're not, again, falling into a trap of hiring people that we want to have beer with. But when we talk about maintaining our DNA as well, is look, at the end of the day, we are a beer insider making organization, right? We're always going to attract a set demographic into the organization. But Heineken has also done a lot of work to move away from alcohol. You know, our focus now is around, you don't have to drink beer, cider, or like alcohol to want to work for an astute brand like us, who sponsors the Formula One, who sponsors the Champions League, who's promoting sustainability, and And yeah, it's still evolving. I would say that we are on our journey at the moment, but we're certainly doing the right things to affect change in the right way.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And Ollie, I'd love to come to you from TUI's perspective of how you assess for that cultural alignment and knowing that somebody is going to thrive in your working environment.
Yeah, so it's an area we're actually quite passionate about at the moment. We've got loads of different initiatives in place, and trials that we're doing at each different stage of the funnel. And an example of what we're doing is in some of our roles, we've got rid of the CV, we've got rid of all of that, and we've got, like we mentioned before, skills-based assessments. Based on culture, based on the skill that is required to do the job, rather than any type of CV that you know, someone viewing that CV might have a certain bias, etc., because they've come from the company or whatever that is. That's been taken away, and it's all based around, you know, the job that you've applied for, and obviously that culture and the culture ad. Yeah. So we've got things such as that, where we're trialing open interview questions, where, you know, we are opening up part of our interviews and part of the questions to try and help different types of people that might want to apply, and break down the barrier to application for those who previously might have not applied because they felt, you know, they couldn't. We're looking into areas of, you know, could we make things a little bit more transparent on, is there an option to do things 30 hours rather than it saying full time, because that's a barrier that might stop people coming in. It's everything around, you know, that hiring process to try and revolutionize it a little bit and change it away from the standard. And I think that, mixed with obviously making sure that in those questions, in those skill-based assessments, the culture is there, will really help not to fall into that trap of homogeneity, like I said before.
Yeah, I think that's very wise words. I think also, you know, and all three of you at your companies are doing it because you're all on Flexa, being super transparent about your working environment, your culture, your diversity. And I do think transparency is a huge part of this puzzle piece, because if you are keeping all of your flexibility, all of your culture, all of your diversity secret, candidates aren't empowered to make an educated decision about whether or not your company is right for them. And so I think it's, when we talk about assessing for cultural alignment or culture ad, I think very often we take away some of the power from candidates, and we think, oh no, it's always up to us to assess that as the employers, as the hiring managers. Whereas actually there's just as much importance of the individual choosing and assessing whether that company is right for them. And we've actually taken, so obviously at Flexa, we're very, very transparent. We practice what we preach. We only ever bring people in through Flexa. That is our whole hiring funnel. But different people's interpretations of words like flexible hours, or words like remote first, or words like fast-paced culture are very, very different, right? Different people will interpret that in different ways. So we've taken that a sort of step further. And in our final stage interviews, we'll spend kind of 5 minutes really digging into what it's actually like to work at Flexa, and really describe, you know, what the culture is like, what the ways of working are like, what kind of behaviors and values make people thrive within our organization. And it's been very interesting to see people's reactions, because some people have been like, oh, maybe that's actually not quite right for me. And then other people are like, yeah, that sounds absolutely amazing, exactly the kind of environment that I really want. But having that sort of 5 minute back and forth conversation, exploring what it's like to work here, for us has really, really helped with that alignment, and meant that people, when they arrive, are not surprised. They kind of feel like, oh yeah, this is what I thought I was getting into. And so it's that availability of information, and really using your employer brand to put as many people off as it attracts, because it just makes it more efficient further down the hiring funnel. So lots of interesting ways, obviously, to be able to do that. I just wanted to say quickly to the audience, please do drop any questions into wherever you're watching from, because our team will collate them all and get them to me, because we will come to questions kind of in the last 15, 20 minutes. So please do send them across, whether you want to ask all of us or whether you want to ask one specific person. Please don't be shy. But moving on to our next question, which I think is a very interesting one, actually, and I've started to kind of allude to it in my experience with Flexa. But Ollie, I'd love to start with you in terms of what challenges you face in maintaining your culture as the organization has grown, maybe gone through like different phases or different challenges. You know, how have you maintained your kind of cultural DNA?
So we're a constantly evolving, growing, changing company, and one of the key things is we're a global organization. And with that comes the challenges of global working. And as we evolve, you know, that there's so many human factors that are included and must be considered. You know, human factors such as, you know, cultural differences between our global workforce. However, what we've done is we've always grown with our colleagues in mind, but also our belief in our culture and our values, especially when we put out the surveys to find out you know, when we built our EVP and our employer brand, and some of the responses were so powerful of why people like working at TUI and what the TUI culture means to them. It was really, really eye-opening when that survey and those results came back. Because what came back from that was obviously the whole Let's TUI It piece, but also people felt that belonging at TUI and working for TUI is also belonging and believing in our way of working. Does that make sense? And our culture, and we accept that, you know, our culture, you know, is unique, and those who do come to us are aware of that and aware of who we are as a business and who our people are. And an example of this is, you know, our come as you are policy is really, really strong. And it is a really, really strong policy. And that the clue, the writings on the tin, if that makes sense with that, is you come as you are to TUI. You are who you are and you work for us. You know, you believe in our culture and the culture of TUI. And we maintain our culture by evolving, by developing it, by doing surveys, by getting feedback from people, understanding where our colleagues sit at the moment and how they're feeling towards our culture, and adapting, doing a top-down view, so making sure that our leaders embody our culture, live and breathe the culture, and that helps maintain the culture. You know, it's not this is our culture, this is how we work. We evolve it, we keep it going, always with the colleagues' experience and external reviews in mind.
Yeah, and you've done such a fantastic job in terms of weaving your culture and also what you stand for as a company into all of your employer brand content. Like whenever I see the kind of videos and the posts that you do, I really can feel, you know, there is a personality to working at TUI, and so much of it is around exploration and trust and seeing the world. And I think you've done a brilliant job at making that a reality without it feeling like sort of corporate washing, which can very often happen. Chris, I'd love to come to you next. In terms of, obviously, as you said, like Mars has really evolved over time. It's a very well-known, very long-standing organization. Like, how have you maintained your culture over time?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one, because obviously, as Ollie was saying, I think, well, very much as Ollie and Kiran have both kind of alluded to, we're all big kind of global companies, and for Mars, as I said, we're so diverse in what we do, from literally chocolate to vet to pet food to rice, even. But Mars is so different. I've been here 6 years, and Mars is so different now than when I started, and that's because we're always evolving as a business. I think, you know, in the next couple of years we will have doubled in size since I joined the business through acquisitions. Like last year we bought Hotel Chocolat, where, you know, we just announced recently our intentions by Kellanova, which will be a huge acquisition, and so there's so much there, and I think really in order to keep that focus on culture, it's about having a North Star, particularly when you acquire businesses. So obviously when you're acquiring a business, you're acquiring another culture, and so we have a whole kind of integrations team that are really there, and a process about how we onboard them into the 5 principles, into the essence of Mars. But it's also about making sure that when they join, so when Hotel Chocolat joined the business, giving them the input into what our culture is, because our culture is our people. And so if we're excluding a whole vast chunk of people when we've acquired a business, it's not reflective of who we are. And then from a broader EVP perspective and an employer brand perspective, it's about understanding what that North Star is, but then being really, really clear with that externally. So there's 2 things I think I've probably said on the Flexa webinar before, or for something for Flexa, but there's 2 things I'm a real big believer in. One, is that holiday. Actually, this probably works really well for Ollie, but I've never considered this with the TUI lens, but you can take it. The holiday has to match the brochure. So for us, if we're selling Mars as this amazing experience, and it's going to be absolutely perfect, but then you join the business and it doesn't match, big problem, biggest problem you can have as a business, I think. And the second one is just understanding that not everyone will want to work for Mars, and not everyone will love Mars. I won't name them, but I've worked with businesses in the past that I would sit here and say, God, how do you work there? But then there are people that absolutely love it there, and that's culture. Culture doesn't have to work for everyone, and I think that's the same for us, is understanding that not everyone wants to work for Mars. And so to your point, Molly, it's about building a culture and building an EVP which is honest and authentic about who we are. Because I think, and I love what you said about in the interview, I always say, and I'm lucky enough to have an incredible team who I work with, and when I was hiring those, one of the first things I said to them in the interview process is, this is an interview for you as much as it is for me. It's a chance for you to make sure you want to work for Mars and you want to work in my team and in TA with us. Because we want to hire thousands of people every year, but we want to make sure those thousands of people we hire are the right people, and they're not going to want to leave us and tarnish that culture ultimately. So yeah, it's just about making sure you've got that North Star and you're really honest and authentic and open to learn about what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. It's iterative as well. Like, it's not static. It's not going to be the same 5 years down the line. And I think also there's no shame in saying, okay, actually, maybe that wasn't the right route to go down, and we need to redefine that. That wasn't attracting the kind of diverse audience we wanted, or actually retention became an issue. There are lots of reasons to relook at culture, relook at your EVP, and relook at your kind of ways of working. Kiran, obviously, I know that you've only been at Heineken for 3 months, but in your experience, obviously, I'm sure you've worked in other organisations that have gone through kind of big changes. How can companies maintain their sort of cultural DNA through periods of change and over time?
I think for me, a lot of it is transparency and taking your workforce on that journey. I think where a lot of organizations fail is when there are significant changes that happen in an organization and you fail to explain the how, the why, the when, it will naturally create a very anxious workforce. Yeah. And this is when then culture sort of evolves. You will have your company culture, but again, when we think about the different teams within organization, the tribes, they will then develop their own sort of feelings. And as we talked about culture being feelings in itself, and views and beliefs and behaviors that then involve. So for me, when I think about other organizations that I've worked for, whether it be through COVID or through the sort of macroeconomic challenges over the last few years, and where layoffs have happened, where restructure have happened, those that do well is where they keep people informed.
Yeah, exactly that. It's like you read all of the horror stories around, obviously, companies making these massive decisions, whether that's a 5-day-a-week return to office, which obviously is within a company's right to do, but you find that the most fallout and the most breaking of trust happens when things are done to someone rather than done with them. And if organization and senior leadership aren't explaining why such a significant change is happening, I think that really, really breaks trust. And ultimately, for culture to really work and really be cohesive, there has to be that level of trust within an organization. Because as people in the comments, and as we've discussed, like, culture is a two-way thing. It's both designed and defined top down, but also it has to be the reality of what people are experiencing from the bottom up as well. We've got loads of really interesting questions coming in, so I want to make sure that we leave enough time to answer them. But the kind of final question that I'd love to cover is around changing generational expectations. I think it's such an interesting topic when we think about culture and we think about what we all want at different phases of our lives. And like, if I look back at my career, I've definitely valued different things at different times. like in my early 20s, I just wanted to work really hard and earn as much money as I possibly could. And then flexibility became more important, and then autonomy and culture became more important later on. So, you know, how are you thinking about appealing to different generations, and particularly when new generations come into the workforce where we don't necessarily know yet what they value and what they care about? Kiran, I'd love to come to you first.
Yeah, so I think from a Heineken perspective, our approach to market spans both consumer and employer branding. So our product evolves with societal shifts. I think one thing I found out today, and some of you may or may not have noticed, but if you look at the Strongbow can, in the past it was a male archer, but if you to look at the new rebrand, it's actually a gender neutral archer in there. So as a business, you know, given the fact that, as I mentioned previously, we are a cider and beer making organization, we've seen the iterations of change. I mean, you don't have to be in an organization like Heineken to see it, you know, where people at one point in time will enjoy beer and then they move to seltzer, a more health conscious based product. So, you know, when I think about Heineken, you know, previously our employer brand pretty much emphasized people connecting with our consumer brand. And with our sort of new brand launch, we shifted that focus. So candidates and people and existing employees don't need to enjoy beer, cider, or alcohol to have a sort of rewarding career with this. But on the flip side, about a month and a half ago, I was at an industry known event, Grocery Aid, and I saw the likes of organizations like Mars, Mondelez, you know, Diageo, etc. there. It seems as though within FMCG, all these organizations are on a sort of similar path. We know that there's a decline of interest, certainly from folks joining the workforce in FMCG. But now we're sort of working towards how do we shift that mindset?
Yeah.
So as I mentioned earlier, we've got Generation Alpha that's joining the workforce in 5 years' time. And when we think about, you know, whether it be the brewings or manufacturing plants, etc., it tends to hire a lot of generational workforce, whether it be your uncles, aunties, grandfathers, grandparents, etc. So now it's looking at how do we push out that messaging to a wider workforce to say, hey, you can have a fulfilling career within FMCG and in particular the brewing industry. But I just think we're not doing that enough at the moment. So, you know, for us, it's pretty much employer brand, EVP. Does that resonate with societal changes? Yeah. Does that resonate with the lay of the land in those areas? And yeah, it's good to see certainly at Grocery Aid, the investment organizations are making. Some people are a bit further than us, but there are equally bigger organizations that are further away from us. But it's good that we're seeing the right steps being taken.
Yeah, it's that listening, it's that collecting data, understanding the relevance, like making sure also that you're appealing to the right audience. And I'm going to say what I mean by the right audience. There's a question that's asked, so we'll touch on that in a second. But Ollie, how are you kind of adapting to his culture and EVP to changing generational workforce? I feel like you've got a very relevant one, a very nice one to be able to run with, but I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts.
So we check, obviously, both external. How is our EVP that we've built, our employer brand, our culture? How does that feel to the current generations, the changing generations, the changing societal viewpoints? You know, we use external partners to rate. We are on platforms such as Flexa to have a look at, you know, how attractive we are. But we also yearly check in with our colleagues. It's every single year we are checking in with our colleagues to figure out how do you feel like when you come to work? You know, are you able to be authentic? What's most important to you? And we are constantly checking and evaluating, both internally and externally, what is it that matters most, or what is it that our offering might be missing, or what is it that, you know, how is it our culture feels wider. And, you know, that we've done quite a few things to try and match generational shifts. So the whole flexibility thing that is huge at the minute, and it is absolutely a vital piece, and staying true to that, because I know there is actually a change in, you know, how flexible some companies are being, and we are staying true to that. And, you know, we recently found out that one of our policies, which is the work-wide policy that we have, where you can work 30 days a year in another country, is really positive. It came through in our surveys that it was one of the most popular things about working for TUI. So we've continued that onwards, and we really do believe in that and that approach. So it's using external factors to obviously help guide us and guide what are the generational shifts and what are the changing shifts in society, but also talk to our people. They're your power. Well, how do your people feel? How are they feeling at work? What's their opinion of your culture? Have their feelings and beliefs changed? Is there something that you're missing? And, you know, talk to them. And if you can, and be open, authentic and honest, if you can fix something or offer something, then do it. And if not, and if you can't, you need to be open, authentic and transparent about that as well.
Yeah, I think those are very wise words. I think very often companies tend to ask for feedback and survey without then making any change off the back of that. And that's when people start to feel disenfranchised and start to then not want to feed into it, because it feels like actually the information isn't going anywhere. Chris, do you have anything to add there in terms of how you're approaching that?
Yeah, I think Kiran summed up one thing which is the exact same for us between relatively similar businesses, and that is that our production sites. So, you know, if we look at Slough being our chocolate factory in the UK, we will have new generations into that workforce, but it's linked to the generational hiring, because it's not difficult to find there being, you know, 3 or 4 generations of one family working in that factory because they're so passionate about that. So we will have that, but we want that, but we also want that to come from people wanting to join Mars.
Yeah.
And I think this comes back to listening and really understanding what's going on externally and what's happening, as Ollie said, with our associates in the business now and how they feel and what they think about Mars. It's understanding what our North Star is. So going back to that, so that the parts of our culture that are really important to us, so the 5 principles and the associate concept as an example, understanding that they're going to be at the core of what we do, but how do we adapt them? And then also for me, it's about building a really positive partnership with internal people, but also external organizations like Flexa that help us understand, and not being, you know, we have a number of similar partnerships where we work with Flexa, we work with My G Work, we work with BYP, we work with Even Break, and these are all organizations from a diversity perspective as well, which can hold the mirror up to us, and being open to see what works and what doesn't, and then backing away and going, okay, with that in mind, with this North Star there and where we want to go, what do we need to do to adapt? And I think from a personal perspective, as someone that's line managed Gen Zs, and as someone I'm sure I will line manage Gen Alpha at some point in my career as well, I think it's about just kind of being open as well, being open to just doing things a different way. You know, I've been in some situations where I've gone, okay, that's how we're going to do it, is it? But understanding that's the future of work. Sorry, anyone gets trauma or talking about the future of work, because it's a very COVID-based term, isn't it? But understanding that things have to change, and we either change with it or we stay here and we don't last for as long as we want to, whether that be as a business or individually.
Is that your dog I can hear chiming in?
It is. Usually the mic's very good at not picking him up. That's Barney.
He had something to say about adaptation.
Be Gen Alpha, to be fair. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that discussion. I think that was super interesting. I love diving into all of the variation between different organizations and hearing from your viewpoints. We've got quite a few questions. So I'd love to I'll try and judge best who I think should take it. But if there's a question that you really, really want to answer, please do chime in as well and be like, oh, I'd love to add something. So I think we've got about 8 or 10 questions. So the first question that I can see is, do we have any advice for candidates trying to determine if the holiday truly matches the brochure? So Obviously, I'm going to say Flexa here. So what we've tried to build with Flexa is exactly to solve that problem. So please do browse, discover those companies, search specific companies, because what you'll see is that companies have chosen what they want to be verified for. Employees have then said, yes, that is the case, or no, that isn't the case. And you can also browse through employee reviews and like really try to understand what it's like to work there, as if you were able to ask somebody that was currently working there. And if a company doesn't match those criteria and their employees disagree with that, it will not appear. You cannot find them. So it's all about genuinely allowing companies to showcase what they're proud of and what the real experience is. But there are also loads of other ways that you can get a feel for it. I really encourage people to treat interviews as a two-way street. It shouldn't just be really one way. Like, come prepared with questions around culture, around flexibility, around the behaviors that make people thrive, and don't feel shy in asking them. I think if anything, it puts you in a very good light. And same with, obviously, you might want to reach out to somebody else that works in that team, or have a chat with them, or ask for an extra sort of interview stage. We've had that, people ask for that before, like, can I meet the people I'll be working with? Again, there are so many different ways, so don't be shy around that. I think it's very important that it is a two-way assessment, and that people are empowered with more information than they currently have. The next question is, how do you manage the task of making your culture as inclusive as possible for lots of different employees with lots of different life experiences? Because I think what's really interesting actually in this question, makes me think of it, is, yeah, when we talk about a culture being fast-paced, or a culture being autonomous, or a culture being structured, that's obviously going to appeal to certain kinds of people. And how do you balance inclusivity and diversity within that? Kiran, I think you're going to be very well placed to answer this.
Yeah, so I think for me is there's no right or wrong answers for this. I think where organization needs to look at how they ensure culture is as inclusive as possible is to ensure that there's a visibility from a leadership perspective, and that what is being preached and echoed is being put into practice and actionable output. But also, I think the key thing is to ensure that, when we think about organizations, the ERGs, the networks, again, ensuring that the networks are there to talk about the various aspects and introduce not just to the demographics that are attracted to those networks, and help educate the wider business. I think that's the only essence and the only way for us to ensure that whatever walks of life that you come from, whatever experiences that you have, is through education. I mean, without information and education, without visibility from leadership, I think you'll just be stuck doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think, data is your friend at that point, right? You want data at every stage of the funnel. You want to see from a diversity perspective, who is finding you, who is engaging, like clicking through and looking at your company, who is then actually engaging, who's applying, and is that filtering down into who is coming into your organization, and then most crucially, arguably, staying. Because I think some companies are very good, a bit like the holiday brochure mismatch, very good at appealing, but then actually the reality is very different. So data, and all diversity data, try and get it from as many places as possible, your ATS internally. And it's something that we work with a lot of companies on, is helping them understand, even from an employer brand perspective, are you appealing to lots of women, or lots of people of color, or people with disabilities? And what do you need to do to change that? Chris, you have a question specifically for you. So someone said that you made a very interesting point about adapting culture when you acquire another business. So how do you juggle that balance to try to make everybody happy, or at least as many people as possible?
Amazing question. And I think it's one that will continue to change as the world grows, because there will always be acquisitions, and there are parts of it which I can talk to, but obviously I'm not the expert in. And I think that the number one is about, and I know this happens at Mars, is the organization doing the due diligence and understanding. And this is something that, one of the reasons I love working at Mars, is we don't just acquire businesses for the sake of profit or anything like that. We have a whole purpose. And so our purpose is the world we want tomorrow starts with how we do business today. And again, that's rooted in what we do and the decisions we make. So it's about making sure that when those that are responsible for making those acquisitions, there are representatives from across the business in those conversations as much as feasible. And then once you've acquired them, it comes back to, I think probably for me, the number one word that I've heard most in this webinar is about listening. And really making sure that you're listening to every single voice you can, and then you're kind of bucketing those and building those into something. So are you hearing from acquired businesses that they love this part of your culture but they don't feel connected here? Then what action are you going to take to drive that? And always feeding that back into that acquisition process, because it always comes back to that. You know, again, it is kind of like the holiday match as a brochure for an acquisition as well, isn't it? Like, is this company you're buying matching with your current organization, or do you need to adapt that? And then it's the same when you do those EVPs. And it's also then making sure that every level of that. So for us, an EVP, making sure that when we acquire a business, there's some level of input into an employer value proposition. And making sure that their story is told, so that making sure we include them, even if it's just including that part of the brand, if that's going to be a standalone brand or whatever. But it comes back to listening every time.
I think that's really useful advice. I also think that, you know, when two companies merge and you end up with people in one situation that have had maybe a certain culture, certain working environment, certain benefits, companies need to think about if they're taking one thing away, what are they giving? Because it has to feel like there's a bit of a negotiation there, rather than company A with this wonderful working environment, company B's a bit shit. And then all of company A just end up in here and everything's taken away. There's going to be a lot of attrition. So you need to think about balancing that and maybe kind of, meeting in the middle. Not that I was saying that Mars doesn't have a brilliant working environment. We know you do, because it's all been there.
The most flexible large UK employer.
Exactly, literally the most flexible large UK employer. Nice segue into a question that I think, Ollie, you'll be really good at answering here. So how do you approach the task of getting senior stakeholders to embody and role model culture and exemplify
it? I feel quite unique to it here. Our senior stakeholders and board are amazing at this. You know, they are very, very people focused and very, very, they care about our culture. You know, when we launched Let's Do It, I remember that our CEO was straight on a platform doing a talk and released it, and was like, we're like, okay, we're going with it, okay, sort of style. But he really does. He embodies it. I think we're quite unique in this space. But it's a matter of education ultimately, and believing in your culture and getting them to. I'm saying getting them to role model it, because ours do, if that makes sense. But it's making them understand, you know, the success of the business, the success of our hiring, the success of your company comes through obviously the culture that you've instilled, because of, for example, you've got that culture definition through your EVP, through all the research you've done, presenting them the data, being quite, cut dry with that data to make sure that they understand why. So it's bringing them on the journey as well. If they haven't been involved, bring them on the journey with you, because they are still people within your organization, and they might have actually responded to some of the surveys as well. So they are actually part of the organization, and it's giving them, it's tooling them up and tooling your leaders up to be able to embody and role model that culture with understanding. But I do feel very fortunate at TUI that our leaders are very people focused and do embody our culture to a T.
Yeah, you do a fantastic job of the kind of employee showcasing at all stages. Really, really interesting discussion there. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed kind of learning about how you've adapted your cultures like over time, how obviously, and I think, what we've talked about really shows that there is such a strong link between your EVP, your employer brand, and culture. Like, it's almost impossible to unpick them. And I think when we were answering questions, like, that became very clear. It was like your culture and your EVP are really, really heavily linked. And no matter what stage you're at, that is going to always be the case, whether you're leaning on flexibility, whether you're leaning on career progression, whether you're leaning on diversity or autonomy, or a mixture of all of them. So I hope our listeners found this webinar insightful and useful. And I just want to say a huge thank you to our three wonderful panelists for sparing the time and giving such brilliant insights. So thank you very much. And thank you for everybody who probably joined a few other of our Evolution of Work Summit webinars, because it's been wonderful to talk through such a broad range of topics. And if anybody has any suggestions for us on what they would like to hear on a webinar in the future, then we can work on that and try and get you some other brilliant panelists who can speak to the same topics. So thank you very much. And I hope